Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Bone with your host, Shelby Daly, ATC, where we talk about all things athletic training. Today, it's book club day, so let's jump right in to Never Split the Difference from Chris Voss. It was 1998, and I was standing in a narrow hallway outside an apartment on the 27th floor of a high-rise in Harlem. I was the head of the New York City FBI crisis negotiation team, and that day, I was the primary negotiator. The investigative squad had reported that at least 3 heavily armed fugitives were holed up inside, and several days earlier, the fugitives had used automatic weapons in a shootout with a rival gang. So, the New York City FBI SWAT team was arrayed behind me, and our snipers were on nearby rooftops with rifles trained on the apartment windows. In tense situations like this, the traditional negotiation advice is to keep a poker face. Don't get emotional. Until recently, most academics and researchers completely ignored the role of emotion in negotiation. Emotions were just an obstacle to a good outcome, they said. Separate the people from the problem. But think about that. And so begins Chapter 3, Don't Feel Their Pain, Label It. So what did you think of our book this week?
Going through it, it was definitely thinking about how people go into negotiations thinking that they're debating and not necessarily just talking through a situation to benefit both sides. So they talked about a lot of the emotions that happen when you enter a negotiation or just talking to people in general, since we slip into that animalistic brain pretty easily. But how do we get people out of that animalistic brain was what they were talking about more today.
Well, they go right to that at the end of that introduction section. They kind of summarize that whole thought. And they say the more you know about someone, the more power you have. And if you're just throwing factoids back and forth, you're not really getting to know the person. You're getting to know what they might know, but you don't know the person. So I think that's pretty cool. And that leads into their first kind of real, hey, here's a cool thing that you might want to know. Tactical empathy. Now that just sounds like so internally conflicted, but they make a good case on the tactical empathy forefront, building on that idea. The more you know about someone, the more power you have.
Yeah, definitely.
So tactical empathy, and so if empathy is a word that gets used a lot, but sometimes people don't always know what exactly it is. So empathy is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to think about somebody else. And so if you're able to think about how somebody else is feeling, what their emotions are, then if you're negotiating with them, you have the ability to assess what's driving them. So if you understand what they're feeling, and especially if you're, you happen to run into 3 heavily armed people in a apartment building, you might want to know, are they feeling like shooting people, or are they just looking for better pizza? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, and I think people get empathy and sympathy mixed up. So I think that's where people get themselves in messes, is that they're trying to be sympathetic and create the same emotion as the other person, which you should still keep that boundary between you, because you're not going to feel the same as them. It's not the same situation that you're going to experience at any point. So keeping that empathy and reading their mind, or telepathy, thinking about what they're going to say before they say it, I think they mentioned in the book, so, but trying to get that, you have to acknowledge what they're feeling too.
Right. And so, that, the conclusion here is if you are negotiating with terrorists with weapons or hostage holders or whatever, or just, a pay raise, the idea comes down to what Sun Tzu called the supreme art of war, to subdue the enemy without fighting, which, as somebody who used to be in the military, I like that idea. If the guys who are negotiating and dealing with foreign policy could get it figured out without us fighting, that'd be fine. We'd just take a 72-hour limo and get drunk.
Well, and I guess the hardest part of trying to label other people's emotions, I think we've gotten into this reoccurrence of thinking people are going to be offended that you're trying to read what they're feeling. Don't you tell me how I'm feeling, or, that kind of thing. So I think that's why people are scared about acknowledging it right away.
Well, and that's absolutely valid. We see it, people getting offended at a myriad of things anymore. So it's and I think a lot of it, very little of it, is meant to be offensive. It's just because we all are different. All of us are loaded with our custom operating system. It's our nature and our nurture all rolled into, here's how we're going to deal with anything that comes up. And so that is individual to absolutely everybody. But what the techniques come down to is, how do you massage the way that you talk to people so that it doesn't come across as an accusation or a qualification of what they're saying. Sometimes if you start putting that the value that you think it is, that can immediately cause some issues with positive communication. And I think in the book they talk about it as labeling. Mm-hmm. So what you're attempting to do is to identify the emotions they're going through, so that you can label them, so that when you are sitting there and thinking with tactical empathy, you can go, oh, there's some stress here, there's some frustration here, there's some fear here, and I can see how they would be in that mindset, and maybe that can help us resolve the situation.
So I can't go around with my label maker and just stick emotions on people's heads, you're saying?
As fun as that might be, let me think. We might actually have like one of those little, label makers, the old ones where they actually embossed it so the letters turned white.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we could definitely get one of those. Like, hey.
Just make sure we get the good sticky paper so I don't have to staple it to people's heads, right?
Stapling the head is kind of a Ryan Reynolds thing in Deadpool. And as good looking as Ryan Reynolds is, staples in your scalp, still not. Oh, although I got to say, your cousin Hunter, he looked like a badass when he had staples in his head. He was just looked like a zipper. It was like, oh my God, we could take him to a punk rock bar and just have a good old time. But,
well, I mean, it is in the skill set of athletic trainers to take out the staples also. So it's not like we're leaving them in forever.
Well, okay, yeah. I got to say, when your mother is watching all those doctor shows and they whip out the surgical stapler, I'm like, oh, well, that would have saved a lot of sewing. Son of a gun. I'm sure that's why I didn't become a doctor, is I couldn't throw a stitch to save my life. Anyway, so labeling without... without the sticky paper, that's where it comes down to the way we ask things. So it's kind of like when you're writing resumes, and you're way better than that than I am. But it's that you want to stay away from certain I statements. I did this. I did that. I am awesome. I can do this job. Whatever. So they want you to stay away from the I, and instead give a basically an open-ended question. So just as you would when you're attempting to get people to talk more about something, we talked about in the previous chapters, the pause, restating a couple of words that they use, allowing them to spend more time talking about it. There's that, but it's also as simple as it seems like, it sounds like, it looks like. So instead of saying, I think you, or I'm hearing that, it takes the I out of there and allows the other party to once again have the opportunity to expand, and then share some of their emotions so that you can start labeling, oh, the guy is upset about this, or the guy, and then be able to work with that.
Yeah. Well, I think the I statement makes it seems very one-sided. And then that's where people get their guard up, and the how dare you tell me how I feel comes up. So it's rolling into the question while acknowledging it on how you're reading it and taking the assumption out of it, I think.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing I like that the author does is, it's one of those things where you're reading a book, and sometimes, I make notes. So if you look at the margins of some of my books, there'll be all kinds of notes in the margin. There'll be little yellow stickies that are stuck to certain pages about hey, that was a good idea. I want to, well, we always forget to do the practice. We learn the new skill or the new idea, the new concept, and then, how would I practice that? So they gave it to you. And like on page 57, they said, take a break right now and try it out. Strike up a conversation and put a label on one of the other person's emotions. It doesn't matter if you're talking to the mailman, your 10-year-old daughter, your wife, and then go silent. Let the label do the work for you. So, like, let's say I was talking to my 10-year-old daughter. I had a couple of those. Hey, and you come to me with, let's say, who was that girl that used to bother you?
Which one?
Okay, well, we'll use an assumed name. Let's say you're talking to me about Allison and what Allison did at school today. And so I could say, as a father, well, it seems like Allison is, and then just give the 2-3 words out of what you just told me, and then that would allow you to then talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't seen Allison in years.
Well, as it turns out, Allison and I are friends on Facebook now, so I'm getting caught up with her. She turned out much different than I thought she would, but still an amazing person. But what are you going to do?
Wow. Well, and they were saying that labeling is the shortcut to intimacy, a time-saving emotional hack. So trying to get closer to that person without having to take them out on a date and, wine and dine them.
So you're saying I could use this when I ask to go out for coffee?
If you wanted to,
Well, let me run that past your mother, see what she has to say. All right. Well, so, and I guess one of the other things that I like is that he tells you what, some of the negatives. He was like, okay, you want emotion. You want to learn the emotion. You want to label the emotion when you're negotiating. You want to be able to address that emotion. But he also identifies that anger is an emotion, and it's rarely productive. Yeah. Figured that one out a couple years ago. Well, how about you?
Well, when I was reading that part, all I could think was the water boy when he's in the biology class and well, obviously they were talking a different part of the brain, but the amygdala.
Medulla oblongata. It's not Satan. It's he got a medulla oblongata.
Well, the amygdala is what they talk about in this book, and so they're asking why alligators are so angry, and alligators are so angry because they got all those teeth and no toothbrush. So.
See, emotional empathy. If I had that many teeth and no toothbrush, I'd be a little angry too. Which again, not happy. So what do? Is you out and bite things.
Oh, yeah. Well, when they were talking about it in the book, they were talking about the facial recognition and how the amygdala lights up more when somebody presents an angry face or angry tone. But then once it calms down, the amygdala isn't as active. So I think it's a survival instinct with the anger. But if we promote the anger with the negotiation, your safety light is going off really hard, I guess, trying to get you to get out of that situation or fight the situation. So it just feeds into each other.
Well, and that's I haven't spent a lot of time in the South. I've been to Georgia, been to Florida, but I haven't spent a lot of time down there. But I'm always amazed at the ability of especially Southern gentlewomen. They can harness that anger and put it out there like it's just like oil on water.
Butter.
Just smooths everything out. And you'll say something, some northerner will say something inappropriate, and they're like, well, bless your heart, isn't that special? God bless you. And they take that, they do that FM DJ voice that the author has talked about, and they just do that smooth, and they don't react with an angry face, and they just, oh, that is so special. When I don't have a Southern Northern dictionary, but I think the translation of isn't that special is a little bit more harsh in the Northern dialect. I'm thinking that's a fact, but I haven't found my Southern Northern translation dictionary, and I don't think Chat GPT has got it figured out yet either. So.
Well, the thing is, they usually offer you more food or drink too, right after it. So,
well, what like I said, the thing I'm so jealous of is just their ability to, because I've got that, that portion of the family that comes from Ireland.
Yeah.
I think it's, we're probably like 30% or something, and there's like an Irish temper in there, and it's like, you get the hair on the back of your neck goes up, and your forehead gets red, and you're like, ah! And you're ready to go storm a castle, and then some Southern belles like, well, isn't that special? Yeah. and they get away with it. Wink, wink, waddle off, and so much easier than storming a castle.
Well, and I think with the story that you prefaced with, as the chapter goes on, they were directly asking the fugitives what they wanted. Kind of the acting dumb portion of the situation to gain more insight on how they were feeling or what they're trying to get out of the situation. So, dumb is greater than ignorance, I think he said. So, playing dumb validates the negotiation technique with I don't understand to try to get them to keep talking and explaining. So I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, I guess that's why dumb blondes always get their way. Maybe that's a little step too far, but thinking about it, I was like, huh.
If we were going to Venn diagram people involved in this conversation, one of us is blonde and female. So I think you're in two of the spheres, but
well, don't I always get my way?
Yes, ma'am. But that's your mother's doing, because having been with her as long as high school sweethearts, I know how to survive. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. With no anger again. So I've been channeling a little bit of that Southern. Yes, ma'am. You want me to what? Shovel the driveway again? But it's still snowing. Yes, ma'am.
It's the third time today.
Man, it had. Oh, man. Whew. Well, I was working on the deck last night, and it was snowing, and it's like, okay, I'm going to sweep off the deck. And then as I'm walking back to make the next pass, it had snowed on top of what I just swept. It was like, there is no winning here tonight. So,
isn't that when you get the blowtorch out and just get rid of it that way? It's more fun, I bet.
Cabernet, a glass, and a footstool worked perfectly in that situation.
Fine.
Just saying. Just saying. All right. So negotiating. So all this, and I read these books with you, and I'm always thinking, oh, maybe I won't have to say yes, ma'am. Maybe I'll be able to. And then we go where she wants to go on vacation anyway. So some of these things may work professionally, but be careful.
Yeah,
Bom dia. Calling out agile trainers and students passionate about medical coverage for high-risk events. Are you ready to take your skill to the next level? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a fast and growing sport in the West, and we understand the unique challenge fights face on the mat. From extreme competitors to high-stakes tournaments, Dr. K and his teams are dedicated keeping fighters in the game. At Black Belt Sports Medicine, we specialize in providing sports medicine coverage at the Jiu-Jitsu events. It's fast-paced, quick decisions-making environment with evaluation happening in real time. You will gain hands-on experience and exchange your skill in high-pressure situations. Joyous and experience the adrenaline of working at the forefront of combat sports medicine. You will gain valuable hands-on experience and enhance your skill in high-pressure situations. Are you ready to rise the challenge? Connect with us today at the Black Belt Sports Medicine at gmail.com. Black Belt Sports Medicine, where your passion meets action. Obrigado.
So, and then there was the story about the flight, the delayed flight, and how he basically just repeated the last two words of everything she said at the end of the sentence, and did the tactical empathy, where the couple in front of him were yelling at him, trying to get their flight booked due to delays, all that stuff, and then he came in and did the technical empathy, like, oh, you've been doing a good job handling this today, and then let her talk, and then, oh, what's going on with the weather, the dumb portion, and then as she talked, he'd repeat the last part of what she said, to get more clarification to keep her talking ultimately, and then he would be silent.
Right. Now, did you run any of those past your sister?
Not yet.
I'm just saying, she may have been involved in that conversation if he was at SeaTac.
Well, I mean, I've only heard the bad side of her experiences, so working at the desk,
you're that
trying
confidant. Okay.
Well, no, I wasn't me, but I know that when we get together, she gets this.
That's what I'm saying. Is your sister tells you, "Oh my God, there was this guy. You wouldn't believe it. He wanted to bring his emotional support armadillo on the plane, and we just couldn't have that." So, yeah. So on that path to tactical empathy, one of the things that they also talk about is the accusation audit. So, when it's again that thing where if you're talking from an I perspective, where I think this, I think that, that's what you think. The whole point is if you're negotiating, you've got to figure out what that guy's thinking and get him to give you some more information so that you can figure out how to come to an agreement. And the first step, they say to do that, is listing every terrible thing your counterpart could say to you. So that's your accusation audit. Here's all the terrible things that they could say to you. And then that way you can be mentally prepared when it's, oh, yeah, no, yeah, all right. Well, tell me why you think, or no, what was our phrase here?
It seems like.
It seems like. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, because that's a good point. Because if you think about when the times that we as individuals have been in the situation where we were the upset one, trying to get something because we felt, the customer service wasn't what it should be or whatever. If they can just not make it worse, it can so much work itself out so much better. And again, it's that Southern Belle thing, is if they're just, oh, that is just, oh, so special. Let me, oh, yes, yeah, and just let them tell you what the problem is. And then once they've kind of, all the air's out of the balloon, it's easier to deal with.
Yeah. Well, and he had mentioned the "Forgive me, Father, I have sinned." So acknowledging your mess ups right off the bat usually helps calm the situation, so that somebody else doesn't need to bring it up. And I don't know if it was the apologetic presentation that calmed it down, or just acknowledging right off the bat that he did it. That's where I was a little confused, but I don't know what your interpretation was.
I think it takes the power out of it. Is, if the accusation is you did this to me and so you owe me because, I mean, accusations are easy. You think about the world we live in today. There's accusations about everything. So the accusation piece is easy. And if you immediately come back with, well, no, or we can't do that, or I didn't do that, or whatever, you take all the sting and the venom out of the conversation, out of that accusation. If you say, oh, well, I am sorry that that you felt that way, and if it is something that you did, and you say, hey, yeah, I did that, yeah, that's on me, and then you can try and get past it, and then really address how to come to a positive close, I guess. What else do we got? Yeah, the upgrade, that was good. I guess that's everything in life turns out to be a negotiation when you really get down to it. I mean, you're always, and again, we talked about this previously too. Americans are sometimes very bad at that because we're so used to, I'm going to go in, I'm going to get what I want, I know how much it is, I pay and I leave, and I don't actually have to deal with human beings in a human way at all. Whereas again, you go to Morocco or someplace else, and you go to the market, you're going to have to deal with people because, one, they're very aggressive about, hey, I got the best spices, come over here, oh, come look at my jewelry. They're really, and they're right there. It's not like in America where everything's on the television or on your phone or on your computer and you can ignore it. There's a guy right there reaching out, maybe even touching your clothing, trying to get your attention, to get you into your booth, to talk to you. And then if it is something that you want, they expect you to negotiate. And we're so separated from that whole interhuman conversation that other countries and social structures just take for granted. You're gonna ask for something, and the other guy is either going to give or not. And in a lot of situations, the fact that you didn't ask for something in return, they lose respect for you. So,
yeah. Well, that was Jadilson. We just got the new iPhones, so we had to get new screen protectors and the phone case and stuff. So he had stopped by a store to see how much a screen protector would be. So it was like $50, and he's like, "Whoa, that's a lot." And then he expressed his feelings, I guess, and then the guy was like, "Well, I can give it to you for $30 for cash." And it was like, oh, well, that's quite a jump, and that seems a little, backdoorsy. So he didn't go with it because it was still rather expensive. But it was just interesting on the different payment methods and how much difference it made.
Well, and yeah, when we think about that in everyday life, the other mistake that Americans make is they think everything is about the price. And so it's, oh, well, I'm going to buy a car, but I'm not going to pay this. And it's like, well, you can sit there, and those are the worst negotiations, because typically the guy behind the desk there, that's the salesman, he's completely limited in what he can agree to. And so it's always going to be well, let me go check with the manager. So then he has to jump up and run over and talk to the manager. And there's a whole negotiation scheme that's happening there as well. So in cars, which are a big thing for people to buy, there's this perception, especially with Americans, it's all about the price. It's all about the price. And the car dealerships and the finance managers have a real handle on what they are willing or not willing to do on the price. So sometimes it's what the person really wants. Sometimes it's they want to pay less. So if they do have an unscheduled maintenance issue, or the car's not as good as they hoped it would be, or they have to get repaired, they have a little extra money. Or maybe they just don't have the money. And that's where you can find out, why can't you pay that? And if you can say that, I'm hearing that, is it that you don't have money? And so sometimes it comes across overly aggressive. I used to watch this one guy, and he was, what? You don't have enough money to buy this car for that price? Like, oh. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes another salesman got to sell that customer a car for more.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tactical empathy. It's like, let's find out it. And sometimes it's just, we don't want to be seen as too easy. We're going to spend $60,000, $80,000 on a car. Sometimes we want to feel like that's not a big deal. Oh yeah, I can buy an $80,000 car with a stroke of my pen. Look at me, I'm affluent. And other times it's like, I just, it's $80,000 is a lot for a car. I want to make sure I'm getting all I can.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're rich, so you don't have those problems, right?
Yeah. In this economy?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So what do you think, what were your significant takeaways for this chapter?
Well, I think the labeling was the biggest thing, which still feels really uncomfortable trying to read somebody else's emotion, because I think some people are just really hard to read.
Right.
But I guess it's just looking at, from their shoes, what would be their worries, the threats, all that type of stuff in the situation that I'm presenting to them, and trying to get ahead of the curve, basically.
Right.
Which I think I'm usually just benefiting people. So I think it's hard to get into that mindset of, well, what would they be worried about?
And that's, I think that's the, like we've been talking about, the empathy thing, and the thing that the author talks about is having that empathy and getting those objections out, because there's what we want and there's what they want. And those two circles just may not even touch on the Venn diagram. So if trying to figure out that middle ground that you can build that relationship on is absolutely. But again, we tend to focus so much on what we want that we just never put ourselves out there to try and figure out what because the other person. I was reading one time, and this gentleman was working for one of back in the days of the major retailers, and with catalog sales and different things. There was a couple that was living out in the rural areas, and they bought this stove, a wood stove, from a company, and they put it in, and for whatever reason, a ember got out of the front of the stove, landed on the floor, and it was a hardwood floor, and it burned a little bit in the hardwood floor. And so there was this whole negotiation back and forth where they called and they said, hey, this happened and we're bothered by this, and that. And the person who answered the phone didn't have the power to do anything for the customer. So, it got escalated to a individual who was the guy who would go out and take care of customers, right? The guy whose job it was to either talk the customer out of their claim or help them out. And so he went in, and he's like, he doesn't want to buy a new hardwood floor for this couple, and he's got his preconceived notions about what they're trying to get, and it's like, it was an inexpensive stove. We're not going to spend $10,000 replacing a hardwood floor. And so it goes back and forth. He drives all the way out to this rural area, sits down with them, and asks them what they want. And it comes down to, they say, well, a nice scatter rug might be nice to cover up the burn marks. And so instead of this $10,000, I think I'm going to have to replace a hardwood floor, it was some scatter rugs, which they actually had in the catalog that they bought the stove in as well. So cost to the company to take care of the issue was virtually nothing. They spent more having the guy drive out there to ask him what would take care of it than actually having the empathy to find out what would satisfy their need. So
yeah, great.
Roger Dawson. I think I got that from Roger Dawson. Listen to him back in the day on cassettes.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Did you have to rewind it with a pencil?
I was reaching for my rewinders. Be kind, rewind.
Well, that was in my discussion boards this week for my class. It was we're doing PICO questions, which is developing a question that has some meat to it. And so I was looking at examples of why a good question is necessary. And I don't know if you've heard the example of, I think it was the Lincoln Memorial Monument or something, and it was eroding away.
Okay.
And so they were trying to figure out why it was eroding away. So they thought it was the chemicals from the cleaners and power washing it every day due to the bird poop. And then they were wondering why the birds were accumulating there. And it was because there was a lot of bugs in the area. And they're wondering why there were so many bugs. And then it turned out to be the lights. The type of light bulb that they had attracted the bugs. So it was
it had nothing to do with Washington, D.C. being full of blood-sucking insects?
Well, I mean, I don't think they congregate around the Lincoln Memorial every day.
On the roof of the Lincoln Memorial?
Yeah.
No, probably not. Okay, all right.
So it was the line of questioning to figure out what was really happening. And I kind of thought this mirrored this chapter well, too. And, it seems like, the act of questioning of why, but obviously presenting it in a certain way. So,
all right. So lots of cool information here, but Miss ATC, how do you apply this type of tactical empathy to athletic training?
I mean, I'd be with a disgruntled athlete ultimately that might not be happy with their treatment or how their injury is progressing and trying to harness what they're feeling around it. And I don't think we acknowledge the feelings sometimes. I think we go and start blaming ourselves of thinking of all the different treatment options or that we could try out or, do we need to send them to a specialist or all these things, but coming back to acknowledging what the patient actually wants. I think in this chapter, they talked about the lady that wanted to donate to the Girl Scouts and how the girl that was trying to get the donation, the different ways she could donate, the different portions of the organization. And the lady just wasn't happy. And then she finally gave the lady the question of like, well, it seems like you're very passionate about to the Girl Scouts. I'm blanking on how she really worded it to her, but then the lady was like, oh, you get me. You get that I have a drive to do this. You can do whatever you need to do with it because you understand where I'm coming from. So
right. So that, again, empathy, once the potential donor felt
had been acknowledged.
Had that her concerns have been acknowledged, she was willing to give the money, because it was never, the question on that one was, they weren't like actively going out looking for, trying to get her to give money. She wanted to give the money, but just it seemed to be that she didn't feel heard when she was the initial folks who approached them.
Yeah.
It was, well, I don't care about that. I don't care about that. It's, why am I giving it to you, was what she wanted to be heard on.
Yeah. It seemed very impersonable because they were just kind of giving her the options instead of talking it out with her and acknowledging her passion for the Girl Scouts and giving them money.
And again, there's a individual who's, I mean, the girls, you did some cool things in the Girl Scouts. And so here you have somebody who is a believer in the Girl Scouts, works for the Girl Scouts, wants to get more money to the Girl Scouts so they can do more of the good things they do. And it's I, and we can do, and this is what we do, this is what we do, this is what we do, without, which was, you're excited about the organization, and to have passion and belief is great. But what that person who had the ability to give you the money that you wanted to get into the organization, that person needed to be heard.
Yeah.
And, you see that in all kinds of different, areas. You see it a lot of times with real estate. You see folks who have accumulated wealth and properties and stuff. And, they're willing to sometimes give them away. Caveat in the contract that says, I'll give this to you as long as, and then they will fill in a blank of, as long as it's used for whatever. Or in Alaska, a lot of times what you'll see is they'll say, I'll give you this land as long as it never gets developed. So you see that down in Kachemak Bay and stuff, where they attempt to keep it green and very natural. I'll give you this land, but it has to never be developed. So it's they're giving something of great value, but they want to be heard as to what they're trying to do with that. Yeah. Now, with the athletes, I remember some situations where trying to get the treatment was difficult because the athlete had an underlying issue that really didn't have anything to do with the injury, but exacerbated the injury because of this underlying value. I think it was a swimmer that was that had issues, needed to take some breaks in training because the muscles weren't recovering. It was causing further issues because she continued to train very, very, very hard, and didn't listen to the athletic trainer when they said, hey, and there was an underlying issue there that was not specifically about how the frequency or the how hard she was training.
That was, a track athlete, and ultimately,
track?
Yeah. So the situation, it was a long TED talk with him. His recovery was not super great because he did all the research and didn't think that ice bathing or doing the recovery tactics were really useful to him, and he wasn't really seeing the outcomes. But later to come out that when a coach gave him sets and reps of certain exercises, he felt like he needed to complete those things even though he had reached the fatigue level, and he wasn't communicating that to the coaches, so they couldn't alter his training regimen. Basically, he felt like he was more superior and that he could override his body and just get it done with, and which was not actually helping his performance. So I think he was dealing with shin splints at the time. I can't remember, it was too long ago, but basically he kept flaring them up because he wasn't able to articulate his mindset on why he had to complete all those reps and sets, even though he had already met his threshold personally when doing the exercises. So I think that's probably the one that you're thinking about, which was a very interesting conversation. But, it was going down the path of asking the questions and figuring out his thought process on why he didn't feel like he was recovering or what variables were possibly causing the injury.
So it was, so he got into that mind over matter mindset, whereas I'm gonna muscle through it, mentally muscle through it. I'm gonna force my body to do something, even though the body is giving me all kinds of signals to say, hey, stop doing that. I sent you an owie from your shins. I sent you some fatigue. I told you to lay down. You didn't listen to me. You didn't listen to the athletic trainer. And it was because the individual thought they could force themselves to mind over matter.
Yeah, they thought it was necessary to do it because that's what the coach had told them. So yeah, not necessarily a negotiation, but figuring out.
Well, again, it's that empathy
of,
is you can make recommendations all day long, and I think you ought to do this, or I think you ought to ice bath, or whatever it is. But if the mind over matter thing, it's kind of a situational thing too, and so that tactical empathy to be able to get down to what is going on is very important, because mind over matter, great for SEALs, recon, special forces, because guess what? Their lives really are on that line.
Yeah.
So you have to get your brain to overcome the pain receptors and say, we're going to do this despite the fact that the body's shutting down. But in athletics, it's all ultimately about performance. So let's figure out how to share with our ATCs and ATCs be able to get the information so we can actually have an effective treatment regime.
Yeah. Well, and this was the same athlete, triple jumper, had gotten new sand for the sand pit, and the coach showed up the next morning after the delivery, and the whole sand pit had been dug out. And he was like, was somebody playing a joke on me? Like, what's going on? And so he, at the team meeting of practice the next day, he's like, hey, does anybody know what happened to the sand pit? And this athlete stood up and he said, well, you got new sand. I spent all night digging out the old sand so you could put in the new sand. So,
yeah,
that's
baby.
the type of athlete I was working with.
He's driven. I mean, stayed up all night to get rid of the old sand. There's
which you can just lay the new sand over the old sand.
He did not get the memo.
No.
Apparently, he didn't do as much research on the sand in the sand pit as he did on fighting you on treatments. All right. Well, so there you go. There's a whole bunch of external inputs that are causing that athlete to run into issues, and it's nothing to do with what the AT is doing. It's that they have some inputs that are affecting the way they make decisions. And so, if you just, well, did you do this? Well, no. Well, I'm hearing that you didn't do it. What? Why? And then figure out why they are or are not doing it, so you can address the underlying inputs.
Everyone's living in their own worlds.
We all are. Yes, we are. I've got my bubble. Don't mess with me.
Oh. Well, I think that's as much as we can get out of this chapter. Move on to the next one.
So coming up next in chapter 4, what do we have? Oop. Have to move all my notes. You thought I was kidding? Let me tell you. Let's see. Chapter 4, Beware of Yes and Master No.
Oh.
I think Master No was the guy who did physical training for Pai Mei.
Oh, okay. I was thinking the Karate Kid. Oh, that was Miyagi.
That was Miyagi. No, that was a joke. I don't think there was any Master No with Pai Mei. I think he did it all himself. But yeah, see?
Yeah, all the notes.
All right. Well, tune in next time. And if you want to find out more about To the Bone, where can they find out more, Shelby?
www.tothebonepodcast.com.
All right. And I will tune in next time to the Bone. I'm Randy Daly, and this is Shelby Daly, ATC, talking about all things athletic training. We'll see you next time, guys.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It is hosted and produced by Shelby Daily, ATC, and Randy Daily. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.